This video is part one of a small series on how to do CI, deployments, and releases for single SPA and microfrontends. We talk about import maps and how to independently deploy your microfrontends to production separate from each other in this video. There are two videos I'd recommend watching first before this video. The first one is build time versus in-browser JavaScript modules. Second one is import maps. We'll be going over in this video the single SPA core team's recommended setup. By the end of this video, you will have seen the first step of getting a legitimate production-ready CI process in place for deploying your front-end code. The first question, though, that we need to ask: what even is deployment for front-end code? So companies and organizations do this differently. However, there are a lot of things that are in common. Ultimately, for front-end web code, it is JavaScript. You have some JavaScript files, some CSS files, some HTML files, some static assets that you need to have hosted somewhere. So you can use S3 or cloud storage. You can use Nginx and a server. You can use a Node Express server with a static directory that it's serving up. Everyone does that part a little bit differently, but ultimately you just have some JavaScript files. And those JavaScript files need to be referenced from the HTML file. So you have one HTML file for your single page app, and that single page app needs to load up some of the JavaScript files. So really, deployment is swapping out your JavaScript files. Now, you can swap out your JavaScript files, or you can upload new JavaScript files. The point is, as long as the customer is getting new code. That's the important thing for deployment. Okay, so let's talk about import maps. Import maps are the center of deployments with the single SPA core team's recommended setup. Here's an example of an import map that is used by a company called Jump. So here are all their modules. Here are all the URLs to download their modules. These are in-browser modules. And really what their HTML file is doing is saying, hey, download this import map and then load up the root. And then root's going to download all the rest of them. And so as long as the URL for the root is correct, we don't know, with each company and organization, it could be a different URL, would be a different URL. But as long as we make sure that this is correct, then that's it. So really, let's come back to independent deployments here. An independent deployment for the style guide module is simply updating the URL to point to a new URL in this import map. So there's one import map for all of production, and you update the URL in that import map to point to a different file. That different file has your new code, and it's on some server CDN that has your code. That's what a deployment is for front-end code with this single SPA recommended setup. You upload some new JavaScript, you change your import map to point to that new JavaScript. Okay, so this video isn't going to show every single piece. We've broken it up into different videos. However, the first piece that we're going to show here is actually a thing called the import map deployer. So there is a GitHub project called import map deployer. What the project does. So in a large organization, you're going to have lots of deployments to test environments, production environments. You need to make sure that if two deployments occur at the same time, that you handle concurrency. The import map deployer does that. It ensures that if you call So if you try to update the import map at the same time, no weird behavior occurs. Both deployments will be successful. You can deploy forward and you can roll back, all with concurrent safety. Okay, so that's what the import map deployer is. So it is a backend service. There's a Docker image for it. It turns out to be a Node.js service, but is a backend HTTP server that you can use via Docker. And it exposes REST APIs to view and modify the import map for your production environment. Let's look at the documentation really quick. Okay, so it has the concept of environments. So you can have a production environment and test environment. You can get the import map, you can update the import map, you can update an individual module or service within the import map, you can delete things from the import map. The point here is that you use REST APIs to view and modify your import map. So if this is your import map and you want to do a deployment, you're going to call the import map deployer. The import map deployer will then go update this JSON file. And the only reason that the import map deployer even exists is for concurrent safetiness. Okay, so that's what we're going for in this video. Is we are going to deploy the import map deployer. We need it to be running so that we can then call it and verify that it is able to read an import map and update an import map. We're going to attempt to do that all in one video. This will test my ability to set up a DevOps infrastructure. So bear with me if it's a little bit slow or if we run into a couple hiccups. But this is setting up the import map deployer. Okay, so I am going to use Google Cloud. I'm not using AWS or DigitalOcean. I have set it up on AWS and DigitalOcean before. Those are completely possible. You have to choose one of them. So I'm using Google Cloud. I'm also going to use Kubernetes to run the import map deployer as a Docker container. Really, if you're not like the DevOps kind of person within your organization and you do actually have a DevOps person, I would recommend just saying, I've got a Docker image, please make it run, and I need it to be publicly accessible. There needs to be a public URL where I can hit it. That's what you need. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so in Google Cloud, I'm going to create a Kubernetes cluster. So the import map deployer uses a process lock to do its concurrency stuff. This means you need to have exactly one of them. If you have duplicates, it actually no longer guarantees concurrent safetiness. So you need to have exactly one. I think that Google Cloud might get mad at us for trying to do exactly one. It always likes to have more than that. But you need to have only one running instance of it. Okay, let's look at our node pool. So we do need to add in some specific permissions for our node pool in order for it to work. And and I forget exactly how to do that. Let's see. Uh-huh. So yeah, you have to have these permissions. Okay, so we specifically need permissions to cloud storage. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an import map JSON file into cloud storage. Cloud storage is like S3 if you've used AWS. And we need our Kubernetes Docker container cluster thing, node pool, to have access to read and write to cloud storage. So here we go. I'm going to give it full access to cloud storage. I think that you only need read-write access. Okay. And if you forget to do this here, you can't change it later within Google Cloud. So it's important that you make sure you create the node pool with the correct access. Okay. So we're creating a cluster. While that's happening, what I'm going to do, I'm going to open up the import map deployer repo. So here I've just cloned it. You can do this a few different ways. I just cloned it and I'm going to build it locally. It is also available on Docker Hub. Docker build dot. So this will create our Docker image. And you know what? It's important here. Okay. Yeah, so config.json needs to actually be correct, and I'm not so sure that it is. In fact, it's wrong. So it's saying locations refers to the environments. So we need to, let's just say a test environment, and this is now the name of a cloud storage bucket. We need to create a bucket. Okay, storage. I'm going to call it YouTube test. See? Nope. YouTube import map deployer test. Okay. Okay. So here we are now. What we need is our name of our bucket is YouTube IMD test. Okay. We got to rebuild it now. We'll build that. Let's go back to our cluster, see how it's coming along. Still creating. Okay. So we now need to tag the Docker image. Then we need to push the Docker image. So we're pushing it to Google's Docker container registry right now. This will allow us to create a deployment later within the Cloud Console. Okay, now it's ready. I'm going to press the deploy button here, see if it's not yet pushed. Okay, there are a couple things we could do while we're waiting, but I think for the sake of not doing too many things at once, thinking maybe we will just wait. What we're going to do here is we're going to, once it pushes, there will be a new Docker image that has been pushed to the Google Container Registry called YouTube Import Map Deployer. And we're going to deploy that one to our Kubernetes cluster. What this means is that it will run the Docker container inside of the Kubernetes cluster that we just created. By the way, Kubernetes is not needed here. You can use AWS, ECS, you can use really anything. You don't even have to use Docker if you don't want to. I'm using it because the Google Kubernetes engine is really pretty easy for someone like me who's not an expert in like load balancing stuff. And there's a button I can press that will just create a public URL for my Docker container, which is wonderful. But yeah, okay. So our Docker container is pushed. Let's see if it shows up. Here it is. Okay, we're going to deploy this one. And done. And continue. And we're going to call this YouTube Import Map Deployer. And deploy. Okay, so this is now deploying our Docker container to this Kubernetes cluster. This might take a little while. One thing that we're going to need, breaking our rule here of only doing one thing at a time, but one thing that we're going to need is we're actually going to need to have an import map.json file that is empty to start out with. So this is going to be our base import map just to start out with. Oh, did it? Okay, we're not going to do that yet because it deployed it so quickly. Yeah, you can see Google put 3 pods even though I tried to say 1 and stuff like that. So that would be something to figure out, is make sure there's only 1. But yeah, look at this nice little button here, expose. Yeah, so it runs on, let's see, I think port 5000. Yeah, it runs on port 5000. So once this finishes, we'll have a Docker container running inside of the Kubernetes cluster. We'll have a public IP address for it. However, it won't be able to actually read the import map because the import map doesn't yet exist. It also won't be able to modify it because the import map won't be able to, what doesn't exist. But we should at least be able to do a health check. And the health check should say everything is okay. Okay, so here is our external IP address. Oh man, ad blocker didn't like it. But here we are. Everything okay. So now let's try to read the import map. env equals test. We need to do import map.json and could not read no such object import map.json. So it's saying your cloud storage bucket just doesn't really have it. Also, I noticed I didn't password protect this. Import map deployer does have passwords. And so you would want to set that up. You set that up inside of this config.json file. You can put in a username and password. I guess it's sort of convenient that there isn't a password that I can look at it right now without having to type it in. But no, it's not good. Okay. So let's upload that import map. Go over to storage. Oops. Here we are. So it's not publicly accessible. However, cloud storage should have access to it. Or the Kubernetes cluster should. However, we are going to make it publicly accessible for reading. Add members. All users, magic keyword in Google Cloud, can view storage. Okay. Now we go over to here. Now there's a public URL. Yeah, here's our empty import map, our base one. Now if we do, let's refresh the page over here. Here it is. Okay. Not bad. Now let's attempt to write to it. So for that, okay. For that, we're going to do services test and let me look up the documentation here. Service equals React URL equals cdn.js deliver.net npm react umd react.development.js. Hey, okay, so it said it worked. So if we go back over to here, we're asking the import map, what is your import map now? It says it's there. And now let's go over to our public URL, and here it is. So we really did modify the import map here. So this actually went better than I thought. it was going to. One thing is you definitely would want to put in a username and a password. Password protect this thing. Also, um, so your deployments now for this is, we've set up the process, like we've set up the back end stuff needed in order to actually deploy things. Um, the process of actually deploying one of your micro front ends is what we'll go over in the next video. So not going to do that right now, but yeah, stay tuned for that next video. Go, feel free, go ahead to the next video in the playlist. That one will show, like, how do you now set up your front end project to call the import map deployer.